You know, we always give credit to the greats, you know, Michael, Freddy, Jason, Pinhead, Chucky, Leatherface. But I want to do a video to celebrate those unsung heroes. So anyway, I'm going to give you my top 10 and some honorable mentions favorite horror killers. Let's do this. What is up, guys? It's time for another top 10. And I got to thinking this morning, there was a specific character that popped in my head. And from that character, I thought, oh my God, why don't I make a top 10 out of this? And that character was just somebody who was a great villain in this movie, but there's so many of these types of characters that usually just have like one movie, or they just are forgotten in time. And so I thought I'm gonna give you 10 and I'm gonna give you 5 honorable mentions. And there are so many of these guys, so I'm gonna miss a lot of them. You're gonna go in the comments, you're gonna be like, hey, but what about this? So what I wanted to do was, for the 10 itself, I wanna give you characters that you might not have thought of. You know, there might be one or two that are kind of more on the nose, but keep that in mind that I'm gonna try to weigh heavily on characters that you'll be like, oh yeah, I guess I forgot about that one, you know? And I'll keep some more of the heavy hitters, I guess, in the honorable mentions, because I like to surprise you guys too. And I like to give you guys movie ideas that you haven't seen yet. Oh, and by the way, on Killer Flicks, after I put together my top 10, I told Killer Flicks this idea, and I said, hey, what are some of your favorites? And the floodgates opened. There were so many of them that I didn't even consider. So I'm gonna give a few shout outs for Killer Flicks before I say number 1. Now, I'm looking at my 5 honorable mentions. You know what? I'm going to switch one of them, because one of them is like, should be in the top 10, and the other one should be in there because this is more of a heavy hitter. Okay, I changed it. So anyway, the 5 honorable mentions real quick. First one's going to be the Collector. The Collector is such an effective villain. I like those, like a robber, a criminal that's in the wrong place, and because there's another criminal that's just like the last person you ever want to be around. That's the Collector. It's very dark and gritty, but he is probably one of the most dangerous people on this list. Like, this is a guy that's an expert in his craft, and if you are in his crosshairs, you are completely up shit creek without a paddle. And this has an awesome final guy in Arkin. Next honorable mention is going to be Lola from The Loved Ones. This is a movie that I discovered a couple years ago, actually on Killer Flicks, and I fell in love with this character. And this is a character that I think probably belongs in the top 10, but she's gotten really popular over the last couple years, at least in the horror community, that I put her on the honorable mentions. I at least wanted to mention her. But she represents like this teenage girl who, you know, she asks this guy to the dance. He does not go to the dance with her. That's a huge, huge mistake. And her and her father, they torture him for the rest of the movie. But this has a lot of like horror comedy, but it does not hold back in the violence department, which are usually my favorite horror comedies. Next honorable mention, of course, Annie Wilkes. I think Annie Wilkes is like the plateau of a psychotic female character. This character that really represents that obsessed fan, because these are people that exist. And she's obsessed with this writer, and she kidnaps him and pretty much keeps him in her house during this big snowstorm. Everybody knows the story. It's a Stephen King story, but Kathy Bates' performance is one of the greatest horror performances I think I've ever seen. I guess this is a good point to say that from here on out, you might hear some spoilers in this list. And I have to give you guys a warning, okay? Because some of these characters, the character in and of themselves is a spoiler. And you'll see what I mean. Let me look at my list, hold on. Is there gonna be some spoilers in there? Yeah, there's definitely one good spoiler in my list. So you've been warned. Once I get to that person, I will let you know though. But Angela is another person that could be considered a huge spoiler. I mean, the end of Sleepaway Camp is such a shocker because, spoiler warning, here we go, Angela was the killer, okay? And if you haven't seen Sleepaway Camp, you don't want to know that going into this. But also, the way that they handled the character in the second movie compared to the first movie, I thought was interesting because it's a completely different type of character, but still, I think, just as effective. Because now, cat's out of the bag, we know who Angela was. She was a killer in the first movie. So now let's have some fun with her. And Pamela Springsteen does a great job as the character. And it's a straight up horror comedy, whereas the first movie is really dramatic and hilarious. but greatest horror ending I think I've ever seen. And then one more honorable mention before we jump into the top 10. Pamela Voorhees. There's another spoiler for you right there. If you haven't seen the original Friday the 13th, though, then you're definitely new to horror. But I've said this so many times, I think Pamela Voorhees is even scarier than Jason, just because of the way Betsy Palmer portrayed her. You know, she seemed like this woman at the beginning when she's first introduced in the movie, like there's no way she could be the killer, right? But in the back of your head, you're thinking, she kind of has to be the killer because of the way the scene's unfolding. But Betsy Palmer was really, really terrifying in the first Friday the 13th. And she's a big reason why that first movie is so great, so shocking. Okay, really excited now. Top 10, here we go. Number 10 is gonna be Jennifer Jason Leigh as the character Hetty in Single White Female. I got the VHS hidden back there so you can see it. I always like to put a couple Easter eggs in my backdrop when I'm doing top 10s, so keep that in mind. Single White Female is so relatable because, again, these are people that exist. That friend that is a little bit too obsessed with, you know, their counterpart, because these two characters, Hetty and Allie, played by Bridget Fonda, they start off the movie as great friends, you know, and Hetty's there for her when Allie's having issues. But then, as the movie goes along, Hetty becomes a major problem, and she's always like right there every second, and she gets really annoying, but in a good way. Jennifer Jason Leigh is amazing in this movie, and there is one scene where she like sneaks into Allie's boyfriend's apartment. She even cuts her hair exactly like Allie, and she goes down on the guy, and he thinks it's his girlfriend. I think that's probably one of the most memorable scenes of the movie, but it's a great movie actually, highly underrated, but amazing performance by Jennifer Jason Leigh. And as a matter of fact, the movie The Roommate that came out a few years ago that's not nearly as good was pretty much a loose remake of that movie. Number 9, a movie that I just reviewed not too long ago, one of my favorites, Cobra. And I love the killer played by Brian Thompson in this as the night slasher. He's kind of the leader of the group. Brian Thompson wanted to know more about the character because if you watch the movie, you don't really know too much about the night slasher. And that's on purpose. Stallone told him, you don't need to know anything about the character. He is pure evil. He's like Michael Myers. And so he doesn't even really talk that much throughout the movie. But Brian Thompson's voice is so creepy and deep. And it shocks me that people don't talk about him more. I mean, he really embodies everything you'd want in a good horror villain. And yes, I said Cobra is a horror movie. It's a slasher, okay? Fight me. Number 8, Cropsy from The Burning. I think The Burning is definitely one of the most effective camp slashers, and it's another movie that has Tom Savini doing the special effects like he did in Friday the 13th, but I think he tops Friday the 13th with his work in this movie. I actually prefer the kills in this movie. They're a lot more visceral, and it has the raft kill, which is, I think, considered one of the greatest kill sequences in all of horror, or at least slasher history. But Cropsy's a cool killer because he was burned at the beginning of the movie, and so really he's taking revenge on these kids. But the funny thing is, like, these weren't the kids that made fun of him at the beginning of the movie. It's a completely new set of kids, but he doesn't care. He's gonna kill them anyway. Number 7, a movie I just reviewed this year actually, Behind the Mask: Rise of Leslie Vernon. The character Leslie Vernon is just this like stroke of genius, this breath of fresh air in the slasher community, because the movie kind of pokes fun of the fact that outside of Michael, Freddy, and Jason, and, you know, a few others, we haven't really had that many great slasher icons. And this movie really honors those characters like in so many different ways, but it's also very meta, very self-aware, and really funny, like really funny. There's a point in the movie where it goes from horror comedy to just straight up slasher movie. And it flows so well. Now, number 6 is one that you're probably not gonna expect, but I had to throw this character on the list. The character of Martin in Killing of a Sacred Deer. This is one of those A24 movies. It's very artsy actually, but the killer in the movie is undeniable. Martin is this teenager who's just taking revenge on this family, especially this doctor who was responsible for his father's death. But Martin might be one of the coldest, most psychotic killers I've ever seen on screen, and he just happens to be a kid. And that makes him even creepier. And the performance by Barry Keoghan in this movie, I think, is one of the most underrated and one of the most memorable performances I've seen in probably the last 5 years. And it's one of those movies that a lot of you probably haven't seen. So if you haven't seen Killing of a Sacred Deer, definitely check it out. It's got some really, really unsettling moments in it. Number 5 is Russ Thorne, the driller killer from Slumber Party Massacre. It surprises me that there are so few slasher movies that use a drill, because a drill is like one of the most practical weapons that a killer can use, and visually it's really interesting and scary. And Russ Thorne is the perfect killer to use it, because this is just a very, almost like Michael Myers type of character. And I gotta give major props to Michael Villella, who played him, because you can tell the guy did his homework, and he plays him almost like a bird. You know, the way he walks in the movie, it's almost like a bird or a cat stalking his prey. He really treated the character like an animal, and it was very effective. And I love that the first Slumber Party Massacre, it's another one of those movies that's got a lot of comedy in it, but when it comes down to the killer, Russ Thorne wasn't playing around whatsoever, and I think that's the way you want to do like a slasher comedy. And I almost put the driller killer from part 2 in this instead of Russ Thorne, because he's so freaking entertaining and so funny, and just completely the opposite of who Russ Thorne is in the first movie. But I have to give it to Russ Thorne, because, you know, if I gotta have a killer, I want him to be dead serious. And really, it was more the guitar than anything in the second movie that really made it for me. Like, if he didn't have that guitar, then it wouldn't have been as effective, even though the Rockabilly Killer is still really cool. So I guess I'll kind of put both of them here. But Russ Thorne gets the gold, the guitar driller killer gets the silver. Number 4, and this is gonna be a little bit of a spoiler. It's for the movie Orphan, okay? No, it's not a little spoiler, it's a big spoiler. Esther in the movie Orphan. This was probably one of the biggest shock twists I had seen in probably since an M. Night Shyamalan movie. It's one of those type endings that you never see coming, that this young girl, she pretty much terrorizes this family because she's really just looking for a family. But she'll kill anybody that's in her way if they try to take her away from the family. And even without that twist at the end, she's scary. So that it's like they didn't even really need the twist, but then when the twist comes, it really knocks you over the head, and it's really crazy that she wants to kill the mother and become the mother of the husband. This little girl who played Esther in the movie too was so effective. Number 3, this is the character I was talking about that inspired me to make this list, Peyton from The Hand That Rocks the Cradle. This is the movie that I saw the night before I went into basic training. And it's always left that impression on me. And I'm sure that that specific incident caused it to be etched in my brain, but also Rebecca De Mornay's performance as Peyton is so memorable. And it shocks me that this movie isn't more popular than it should be, because Rebecca De Mornay really played this character with a lot of care. You could relate to her. You felt bad for her, actually, because her husband was killed, and so she wanted revenge, but her husband happened to be a piece of crap that took advantage of this pregnant woman. But this is one of those movies where, like Orphan, this character just infiltrates into this family, makes their life a living hell. And I think these movies work so well because we know what the family doesn't know. So we're like gripping our seats the whole time because we're like screaming at the family, don't trust her, you know? And Peyton was a very effective character too, because she's a beautiful woman, she's very seductive, and she uses that to her advantage, or she tries to use it to her advantage in the movie. The husband doesn't fall for it. But what a ride of a movie this was. Now number 2, this character definitely belongs on number 2, Buffalo Bill from Silence of the Lambs. And the reason I put Buffalo Bill on here, because everybody knows Silence of the Lambs, right? But Hannibal Lecter gets all the credit. And he deserves the credit. I mean, Anthony Hopkins' performance is one of the greatest horror performances ever. But a lot can be said about Ted Levine. His performance as Buffalo Bill is just a completely different character, but easily as effective and creepy. And I think, he gets the last act of the movie. the big showdown between Clarice, it's against Buffalo Bill. It's not against Hannibal Lecter at all. And you're right there with her. He is terrifying, you know, especially that iconic scene where the lights are off and, you know, she's got the gun, but she can't see anything. So you think he's going to kill her. But this is a character that was like based on Ed Gein, and he would rip the skin off of his victims. I mean, some pretty creepy stuff. You know, skin lampshades and all that. You got that iconic line, it puts the lotion in the basket, which has been, you know, I think he has just as many iconic lines as Hannibal Lecter does. Can you imagine one movie having not one but two iconic killers like that? So I had to put them on this list. Okay, before I announce number one, I want to go over killer flicks, and I want to just mention a couple of these. John Brandon Diecast, and he mentioned Catherine Isabel from Ginger Snaps, which was a great pick. I had to mention her. Ashley Parker, this is one that almost made my list, but I think everybody knows Sam from Trick or Treat, who punishes anyone who doesn't follow Halloween traditions. Yeah, Sam definitely belongs on the list. Another one that I put on the list was Sammy Kerr from the other Trick or Treat movie, but he didn't make the list, I guess. I mean, I'm scrolling through just so many of them. Johnny Mogny says the Hag Mask Killer in Curtains is a great one. I've constantly seen this killer, the picture, but I still haven't seen Curtains, but definitely worth mentioning. Chris Snyder mentions Ben Willis from I Know What You Did Last Summer. That's a really good one, the Hook Killer. J.C. Wiseman says Bill Paxton from Frailty, another great one, actually. Rest in peace, Bill Paxton. And a few people mentioned Rusty Nail from Joyride. I almost put Rusty Nail on here too. Aaron Yap, I'll give him a shout out. And then the last one I'll give is Gareth Packham. Life Force, Matilda May from Life Force. She's naked through the whole freaking movie, by the way. But yeah, that's another good pick too. And number one, and I've always said this, Billy from Black Christmas. I think from the original Black Christmas, I think Billy is probably one of the most effective killers because you never see him throughout the movie. He's disgusting. You know, the lines that he says in the phone are just so unsettling and creepy. And this is probably the first movie where the killer was in the house and the characters in the movie didn't know that the killer was in the house. You know, that's a scary premise alone, that the killer is in the attic the whole time while they're there. And Black Christmas is one of my all-time favorite movies, but Billy is a major reason for that. He is an unsettling type of character. And it's a crime that they just tossed the character out the window in the remake, you know, and made it this agenda film. And that's not what this countdown's about. I'm not going to go into that, but I'll just say Billy deserves number one on this list. So anyway, guys, I'm sure I missed a lot more. Let me know in the comments some of your favorite underrated horror killers. Also, be sure to come over to Killer Flicks, where we talk horror all day and every day on Fridays. We do Free For All Fridays. Follow me at Drumdums on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Letterboxd. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching. Have a great day, and Drumdum out.